Politics of, by, and for the people. Brought to you as a public service by the members of organized labor who work and live in your community.
Hello there. In two past programs here, we've outlined the extent to which American big business is and has always been involved in politics. And we've touched on some of the social and economic consequences growing out of big business intrusion into political life. We've also documented the fact, as reported in Fortune magazine and other responsible business publications, that this year, 1960, big business is planning a new and more massive experiment in political control, namely, an attempt to take over both political parties, beginning down at the precinct level and using specially trained executive personnel for this purpose. Now, in the second program, we pointed out that the failure by working people to participate in political activity, which has reached a point where some 80% of the country's lowest paid workers normally neither register nor vote, that this abstention is costly both to them, costly to the nation as a whole. We've also put some stress on the fact that wage earners at large may be greatly helped or hurt as a result of political decisions. Collective bargaining alone, we've found, is not enough. Often what's gained in the wage contract is wiped out through a political decision by government. In reality, despite the great hullabaloo which employers and employer organizations and newspapers make about any expression of interest in political matters by organized labor, electoral activity by working people has been extremely limited in our history, and the more so when you consider that people who work for wages and salaries actually constitute, after all, the huge majority of our population. And when labor has participated actively in politics, it has been almost without exception in support of objectives whose benefits extend to all sectors of the population, not just to wage earners alone. We need think here only of labor's support of free public education, of taxation based upon ability to pay, of Social Security, of the 8-hour day, and so on. Each of these, and of the several other political ends to whose attainment labor has given local and national support, has been opposed in its time by business interests. That opposition continues, in fact, to this hour, not only to labor-supported social objectives, but indeed to labor's right to pursue these objectives. Well, today we'd like to examine with you two issues of overriding public importance in which organized labor is deeply interested, problems to which solutions must be found, and quickly, in the interests of the entire nation. We're talking about education and health. Everyone today is aware, we suppose, that American education, the entire system, is in real crisis. In the average community, the schools are overcrowded. They're often downright unsafe. Fire and the potential of mass tragedy lurk somewhere in nearly every school system. We have too few qualified teachers, and the teachers we do have are generally underpaid. A high student dropout rate before completion, even of high school, robs millions of our young people of their futures and robs the future of the developed talents of these millions. Nearly half of our most intelligent youngsters today don't even enter college. We are spending less than 4% of our gross national product on education, and the Soviet Union is estimated to be putting about 15% of its income into education of all types. The basic reason for the financial starvation of our schools is that education has been largely financed in the past, and indeed into the future, on property taxes and related forms of regressive taxes whose impact is basically unfair and whose yield is progressively inadequate. Education will become in America what it should be, what it must be, only when it's supported in some part by federal aid. By every poll taken on the matter, the American people, with little distinction as between party affiliations or distinction based on religion or geography, want federal aid for schools. But to legislate federal aid to schools on the scale required by the national educational emergency is a far tougher undertaking than simply to take an opinion poll. Federal aid is opposed by the same business interests which are opposed to the graduated income tax. And we will get effective federal aid to schools only with the hardest kind of political work in Washington. And there is where COPE comes in, COPE, the Committee on Political Education, which coordinates the work of all of the unions of the AFL-CIO in support of federal aid to education. That work takes manpower, it takes money, because part of that work involves the election to office of congressmen and senators who are pledged to vote for federal aid to schools. Obviously, what we've said thus far about education in America does little justice to the magnitude or to the urgency of the problem. We realize this. But surely you'd need no persuasion on that. What may not have occurred to you is that you yourselves can put a powerful shoulder to the wheel by contributing $1 to COPE. Our free public education system may be said to have been born out of the efforts of America's organized working people in the past. It can be restored to what it should be by the same kind of effort by working people today. If you believe that every child should be entitled to an education commensurate with his or her abilities, and if you believe that this nation's future, even its chances of survival, are shaped in the kind of classrooms we offer our youth today, back up that belief with a dollar. It's been said that politics is the science of who gets what, when, and why. But it is generally true, as John Morley tells us, that those who treat politics and morality apart will never understand the one or the other. It's regrettable that the problem of health and medical care should ever become a matter of political contention. Medicine and pharmaceutical science today have become gigantic money-centered industries operated often out of the coldest profit motivation. And their opposition to rational solutions to health problems has forced this issue into politics. While even their victims may be largely unaware of the actual extent of fee gouging, fee splitting, and unnecessary surgery which have riddled the practice of medicine, the recent Kefauver Committee exposures in the drug industry have given the public some insight at least into the callous practices there of the commercial drug peddlers, shady advertising and promotion, the subversion of physician judgment and training through a veritable army of detail men, secret price rigging as between different drug makers, collusive bidding on government orders for pharmaceuticals, price markups in excess of 7,000%, the constant introduction of new versions, so-called, of old drugs with little or no medical distinction between them, and staggering market profits among the holders of the major pharmaceutical stocks. Well, millions of Americans now know or should know that a series of 3 shots of the Salk polio vaccine sold in this country for as high as $8 can be obtained in Canada for a maximum of $1.50. Worse, we have seen scores of community attempts to create free or low-cost polio vaccine clinics aiming at the widest possible inoculation of the population, crippled or sabotaged completely by the refusal of county medical societies to permit their doctor members to give their services to these clinics on any but a fee-for-service basis. In an age of medical miracles, millions of Americans find health literally beyond their financial reach. And maybe these figures will explain why. In the 12-year period 1947 through 1958, the General Consumer Price Index, what's called the Cost of Living Index, rose by 28%. The price of medicine and medical care, however, rose in this same period by 49.7%. And believe it or not, expenditures for drugs alone today are substantially greater than total public expenditures for physician services. It is not, however, cost as such which concerns organized labor primarily. No one questions, after all, the right of doctors, or even of drug company investors, for that matter, to high remuneration, although some might be inclined to question whether an annual income of $200,000 for a medical specialist or a price markup over cost for a drug maker in excess of 7,000% are either ethical or equitable. No. Labor's basic concern is with the adequacy, the efficiency of the present organization of health services, which tend to exclude precisely those whose need for these services is greatest, and which are in the main administered so as to maximize profit rather than to maximize health. There's much that union members and others can do toward improving health services, toward extending their own lives, to put it bluntly, by contributing $1 now to COPE, which works for all of us toward this end. Each of us, with luck, is going to be old someday. Already about 16 million of us are 65 or up. 2 basic things, each one related to the other, afflict nearly all retired persons. They have limited incomes, the average about $1,000 per year, including pensions and all outside income of all kinds. And secondly, their need for medical services and drugs is far greater than the need of any other age group. That much is obvious, isn't it? Retirees are the special victims of the low-income, high-need, rising-cost trap. And that trap awaits all of us if we fail to disarm it now. That trap is not just a hazard of the aged. Please keep this in mind. The average employed worker of this country spends $100 per year toward the medical support of retired parents. So the problem of health care for the aged isn't one which can be pushed into a corner as their problem. It is literally everybody's problem, now and eventually. In the present session and for the past several sessions of the Congress, COPE, the Committee on Political Education, has been urging the adoption of legislation such as that proposed in the Farrand bill. Without going into too many details, although we'll be happy to send a copy of the bill to anyone interested, the Farrand bill would do this. It would provide up to 6 weeks per year of prepaid hospitalization and care to all persons on Social Security retirement status. And the cost of this program would be covered by the basic Social Security tax. Now, there is no sound argument, whether medical or economic, which has or can be raised against this measure. There is no workable alternative which has or can be offered to it. The private insurance schemes have failed dismally to bring relief to retirees of low income. The extensions to the age of Blue Cross Blue Shield and that type of coverage betray the same weaknesses. They are prohibitively expensive for most retirees. They tend to rise in cost each year, and they're simply riddled with shortcomings in coverage. Legislation such as that proposed in the Farrand bill would not only improve enormously the health and health cost problems of the aged, in the process of doing this, it would strengthen health insurance systems generally by removing their highest cost insurees. Its humane considerations we leave aside as too obvious and too compelling even to require any exposition. As a people, no less than as sons and daughters, we cannot remain deaf to the prayer, "Cast me not off in time of old age, forsake me not when my strength faileth." Well, again, there's been time only to scratch the surface of America's crises in education and health. You can obtain more information on them, however, and at the same time exert a very powerful form of personal influence in support of solution by doing this simple and constructive thing right now. Take a dollar bill. In return, you'll receive a receipt for your voluntary contribution and these useful aids to effective citizenship: Business, Politics, and You, which documents everything said in these programs and more; Labor and Politics, which explains the relationship between politics and collective bargaining; A Positive Program for America, which outlines the legislative program of the AFL-CIO; the Farrand Bill, which is a detailed pamphlet describing the hospitalization insurance plan for all retirees on Social Security. All of these and the satisfaction of knowing that you have helped are yours in exchange for $1.
Politics of, by, and for the people has been brought to you as a public service by the members of America's labor unions who work and live in your community.